Yo, what is up, guys? It's Ken Beast here with the Random Reddit readout. That's right. This week I'm going to be reading you guys 2 nuclear revenge stories. I found some that came across my Reddit that just seemed really good, and I wanted to share them with you guys. If you guys like the content, please leave a like, a comment, and hit that notification bell so you guys can be notified on my, upcoming videos and stuff like that. Sorry for the wait and the delay with you guys. I had to take care of some stuff personally, but everything's gonna be working out pretty fine pretty soon. So if you guys like the video, like I said, hit that like button, and I hope you guys enjoy the stories. So let's go ahead and get right into it.
That's cause Jesus Christ is my nigga.
Hell hath no fury like me scorned. Alright, so this was posted in r/NuclearRevenge by u/MNWNM. Hell hath no fury like me scorned. This story starts 31 years ago, but the revenge part was purely serendipity that began 2 years ago. I'm going to shorten some/most parts of it because it's a crazy ride, but I'll be happy to answer any questions y'all have. I learned a ton on this journey, and part of the reason for this write-up is to share that with others. The beginning. In 1990, when I was just out of middle school and my sister was still in elementary, my dad met his third wife at the only gas station in our town. They soon moved in together, and my dad pretty much abandoned us in our basement apartment to live in a shanty houseboat. That didn't run. To live with her. He would have shown up every other week and given me $40 for groceries, and eventually someone figured out the situation and called my mom. We went to live with her, which was, believe it or not, worse, and my dad and his shanty wife got married in 1991. Not long after, she called me and told me that my dad's brain tumor had returned, it hadn't, and that he couldn't handle the stress of being around us anymore. That the only people he could bear to be around was her and her son, Shorty, who was my age. When I called my dad to ask if this was true, he said it wasn't, and he couldn't just believe that she would just say that to begin with. That was one of our last conversations until 2 years ago. The middle. There's not much in this part. I worked my way through college, living in my car from time to time, and my dad and I were no contact. But I heard from family that he'd bought a house and put his son through college, basically vocational classes. When grandmother died, Shorty and Shanty's wife showed up in a truck and took all of the furniture and anything else that wasn't tied down or already gone. Eventually, I went no contact with my dad's side of the family, and I struggled for years. Decades, really, but I made it. And I have a great job and a good family now. The best revenge is living well, right? The pre-end warmed up. 2 years ago, October 2019, I got a call from my dad's brother, Alan. He told me my dad was in a nursing home in another state. Great! And I needed to go see him because he needed my help. WTF? Shorty had ghosted him. The nursing home, coincidentally, was 20 minutes away from my house, and I saw an opportunity and I went. The reunion was underwhelming. I didn't want to make amends, but I did really want to hear how he wound up dumped and all alone in another state. And it was a really, really good story. Shanty's wife got lung cancer and put my dad in a nursing home before she died in 2017. She suffered, and I was happy to hear it, but sad it wasn't ass cancer. Shorty became his power of attorney, POA, when she died, and had been visiting my dad, living in my dad's house with his 2 children, and taking care of my dad's affairs since his mom had died. But now he was MIA, and my dad was worried about him. He asked me to drive an hour and a half to his house and check on everything. That's all he wanted. He never even asked me how I had been. I agreed to go to think, kind of out of morbid curiosity, and I'd never really been to my dad's place. I did want to see where he lived with his real family for 30 years. I wanted to see what could have been my life. It was 50 shades of effing awful. The grass hadn't been cut all summer. You couldn't get to the front door for the overgrowth. There were 3 pickup trucks in the yard. 2 were full of trash. Cabs and beds and back seats, just trash. Mail, clothes, paper, shoes, garbage bags. I couldn't understand it. My dad's handicapped modified SUV was on 4 flats and full of garbage too. Of course I didn't have a key, so I just walked around. From what windows I could look through, the inside was in shambles and hoarded to hell. On the front and the carpet doors were dozens of notices from the city that they were going to condemn the place. The carpet was also hoarded, boxes and boxes stacked on each other, most rotting from the rain. The yard was full of garbage. Broken Christmas ornaments, more shoes, rusted tools, old toys. There was a letter in the mailbox notifying him that since the house was abandoned, mail would no longer be delivered there anymore. That night, I googled powers of attorney and how to use them. I went back the next day and showed my bed-bound dad the pictures on the phone. He vowed to beat Shorty's ass, then asked me to help out more. I told him I would, but he'd have to sign over power of attorney to me. All of it. Durable, financial, and medical. If he didn't, he could figure this shit out himself. He agreed, so I set about finding a lawyer who would drive to another state and do the paperwork in the nursing home. Bless that lawyer for being so good at his job, because all I did was tell him what I knew, and he put together a beautifully bulletproof POA. It was full of stuff I didn't even know I would need. He also filed the paperwork to revoke Shorty's POA, and now I'm unstoppable. We're from a small rural town, and it's the kind of creepy, landlocked place that no matter how long you've been gone or how far away you've been, when you go back, you'll see someone you know. Even if you don't know you know them, it's like playing 7 Degrees with everybody, all the time. It's suffocating. But it can also be helpful. The beginning of the end. I got to work the next morning. I didn't know how scorched the earth would be when I finished, and I didn't want Shorty or anyone from his prolific, inbred family trying to find me. So I made sure nothing I did had my name on it. I opened a Google account for my dad and got a Google number. I opened a P.O. box for him in his town, and I put in a mail forwarding notice. I put his credit report. I pulled his credit report, took the POA to my dad's small town bank, and changed the address on his accounts and got new account numbers. I requested copies of every transaction back to the day Shanty's wife had died, about 13 months worth. I had to go to the main branch 2 hours from my house the next day to pick up the records. I sat in the lobby all afternoon going through the accounts. I cornered a service rep and got a crash course in his debts and deposits. This is when I figured out the extent of Shorty's staggering stupidity. My dad got about $5K a month in disability and Social Security every month. Twice a week, Shorty was going into a branch and withdrawing cash. All of the cash for 13 months. And every time he did it, as the POA, he had to sign a form stating that he was acting on behalf of my dad. And that form was notarized by the bank. I went through every withdrawal and got the bank to confirm that every one of them was made by Shorty. Then I went to the house and called a locksmith. I knew it was bad, but I had no idea what was waiting for me there. He got the first door open and the stench rolled back like a fog bank. We both gagged. 2 locks later, I was so embarrassed by what he had to see and smell, I gave him a $60 tip. And with shiny new keys in hand, I called the cops. I told them I was POA for my dad and was checking on his house, and there was 3 vehicles there that didn't belong to him. He asked me if I knew who they belonged to, and I said no. I wanted them towed. He told me to call a tow company and that he would meet me there. They showed up with 2 wreckers. The tow guy kind of got out and asked me for a signature. I only signed my first name, and as I was signing, he asked, "Do you know Shorty?" Running on pure hatred at this point, I surprised myself. "Do you?" I asked. He said he did, and that he's an asshole, I responded. "He might be. Hey, can you do me a favor? If you see him, will you let him know that NM is coming for him?" His bravado evaporated. He knows a crazy bitch when he sees one. They towed the trucks. When everyone was gone, I opened the door in the carpet to peek in. The sun was going down and it was dark in the house. I heard something faint, and after some seconds realized it was roaches and rats doing their roach and rat stuff. I could smell it all in my hair. I sat on the carpet steps and watched the sun go down. I was mad, just so freaking cosmetically livid that 72 hours was all it took to dissolve 3 decades. And here I was, stinking and listening to the rats cleaning everyone else's up, taking time away from my family, and for what? I had to come into Jesus with myself. I could either bow out now or double down, and the thing is, I'm tenacious. To a gosh dang fault. I had to be to survive, and this was a bone I couldn't put down. The thought of Shorty's life being upended, his only source of income probably disappearing literally overnight, and my dad having to hear secondhand from me that he's broke and alone, made me feel absolutely giddy. I desperately wanted them both to lose what they had left, so I decided I was going to triple dog down. That night, I googled restraining orders. And it was surprisingly easy to get one. I went to the courthouse in my hometown, went to the clerk's office, and told her I needed a restraining order. I filed the form in at a rickety little table when I was there. I wasn't prepared to see a judge that day, but she took the form and said, "Okay, I'll see if the judge is still here." That kind of scared me. She took me to his chambers, and as I was waiting, I looked around and saw he had certificates of appreciation hanging up from various veterans groups. Then I wiped my palms and thought, fish in a frickin' barrel. He asked about my dad's stint in the Marines and about the DoD office logo on my sweater. I'm a contractor. He read my form and granted the temporary order. I would have to go back for the permanent one where Shorty would be able to argue against it. Then I went home and Googled biohazard companies and elderly abuse statutes in my state. I hired a biohazard company to shovel all the shit out of the house for about $7,000. I would have paid double. They found my dad's mummified dog under some pizza boxes in the master bedroom. They sent me pictures and salvaged some papers. Shorty was served during this time, and a hearing was set. I got to work collecting and documenting shit. I made pictures and spreadsheets and timelines with cross-references because, F it. Now that I had my full attention, the paid versions of Truthfinder and Trello seriously got me through all of this. In my spare time, I went to a nursing home and gave my dad 8 by 10 copies of the pictures of his dead dog from every angle. Before court, I went to the police station nearby and told them I wanted to report an elderly abuse crime. A white-collar detective came out and told me it was a domestic matter and that since Shorty had been POA, everything that he had done was legal. And this was the day I got to teach a small-town detective about the fiduciary responsibilities of a POA. Thanks, Google. I handed him a copy of the statute with the applicable sections highlighted. Then I handed him a thick folder with bank statements, pictures of the hoarded house, and the dead dog. A copy of my dad's credit report that showed he was tens and tens thousands of dollars in debt, and a spreadsheet listing every cash withdrawal with a running total of the stolen amounts. The grand total was just over $130,000 in cash. That's not including the lost value of the house or the credit cards he opened and used. I told him he could keep the folder since it wasn't the only one that I had. Then I told him I would wait for a case number and I sat down. He came back about 30 minutes later and apologized, said I had a case and gave me a case number. Then I headed over to the courthouse. There were other people there and I had to wait my turn. And while I was waiting, that stupid mother effer schlepped his sloppy ass into the courtroom by himself and obviously, literally, not metaphorically, dirty. His shoes were untied and that turned my giggle box over. Then it was our turn and we stood up. The same judge asked him some questions, and then asked if I had any proof. I had a very thick folder of it. The judge asked me if I had gone to the police. Well, sir, yes, I have. Do you have a case number? As a matter of fact, the order was granted permanently and for life, but not before the judge halted proceedings and told Shorty he needed a lawyer. Someone told me that the courthouse would have a copy of my dad's DD-214 discharge papers, so while I was there, I got a copy of those, because why not? I also used my POA to take Shanty wife off of the deed to the house. That way, if my dad died and it went to probate, Shorty had no immediate claim. I also went and got copies of my dad's birth certificate and Shanty's wife's death certificate. Technically, stepchildren can't request that info, but the clerk who waited on me recognized my dad's name and told me she lost her virginity to my uncle, Alan, in the 60s, and went to my grandparents' funeral, so I got all the forms I wanted. Shanty's wife left my dad $50,000 in life insurance and about $35,000 of what was left since Shorty was spending my dad's money and not his mom's. So I opened an Ally account and transferred every penny over. Then I set up recurring transfers for the monthly deposits. At any given time, there was no more than $100 in his account. I also found a house flipper that paid me enough for the house to pay off his mortgage. That's the thing about probate. There's nothing to fight over if there's nothing there. And I made sure there was freaking nothing there. My dad died thinking he still owned a house. Speaking of which, this is about the time I found my dad's life insurance policies. They were up to date and Shanty's wife was the beneficiary. My POA didn't allow me to change the beneficiaries, but it allowed me to assign them. And since Shanty's wife was dead, there was technically no beneficiary. This is where the death certificates came in handy. I assigned my sister and me as beneficiaries, irrevocable too, which means that the only way to change that is for my dad and me and my sister to agree to it. I kept my dad in the dark about all of this, and the only thing he ever really knew about was this restraining order and his dead dog. I found out that he had purchased the gravesite next to Shanty's wife and wanted to be buried next to her. That was just never going to freaking happen. I googled national cemeteries and found out he was qualified to be in one since he was a disabled Vietnam-era veteran. So I arranged for that instead. All the cherries on top. My dad died in June this year and I was there. He was buried in a national cemetery far away where no one will ever go visit him. The only obituary I ran was on the funeral home's website, and that was only for insurance purposes. I wrote it as vague as possible. There was no service. His urn was purple, the color he hated the most. I got a call in August from the prosecutor's office in my hometown. The lady on the other end is married to my first cousin because, of course she is, and that's how it frickin' works there. Shorty was arrested just after midnight on July 1st and was still in jail, and had been arraigned on felony elderly abuse charges. He's facing 10 years in FMITA prison. She told me not to expect the trial anytime soon, as soon as I could take it up, as it can take up to 3 years for that to happen. I told her that was awesome since the uncertainty would hopefully haunt him, and after all of that, he's still got prison to look forward to. He lost his kids, he lost his dad, spending his mom's cancer money, he lost his free house and trucks. He has no credit and will never be able to get any sort of decent job and will, hopefully for a long time, not be able to find a decent place to live. And I sleep like a freaking baby. Dang, so since your dad left you like mine, you just got all kinds of revenge on your stepbro. I mean, I guess since he got to live the way that you wanted to live, I mean, if he had just played it smarter and actually done what he was supposed to be doing, he would be living comfortably. But see, he had to go and do elderly abuse. That's not cool. Who bullies the elderly? Where they do that at? Anyways, on to the next story. In the 70s, a gang beat up my dad and put him in the hospital, so he got revenge on all of them. This was posted by Craigle-Tom on r/NuclearRevenge. This isn't my story, but rather my dad's. I know the believability of this might be hard, but I believe this story to be true. My dad was a very nice and hardworking man with some of the greatest patience for bullshit that I've ever seen. But he also had a temper that can make an angry moose turn the other way if he was pushed far enough. Well then, this happened when he was definitely pushed far enough. He told this to me after I told him all the things I did to prank evil Mama Bear before moving out of her house. He told me this story once and only once about 10 years ago and never spoke of it again. I wrote it down in a journal from memory back then so I wouldn't forget. So I'll try and retell it as best as I can from what I wrote in the journal about a decade ago. And if any of you thought my revenge streak I did on my mother before moving out was too much with the gnomes and the laxatives, what my father did was much more brutal, and probably explains where I got my conniving side from. This story happened in the late 70s. My dad was a young man striking out on his own for the first time. He lived alone in a really crappy part of town while attending college and working at a gas station as a steady job. But the area had lots of thugs and lots of violence. There was a group of guys he knew from high school that just loved to mess with him. The first thing they did was spray paint graffiti all over his car, a '68 Chevy Nova. Then they started harassing him every night he was coming home from work or class because they were always hanging around his building. The leader of the gang was a big guy Dad referred to as Ted. Don't know if this was his real name or not. Ted was a relentless bully to several other kids in school. He beat up my dad many times over the years. But in high school in particular, he hated my dad because Ted failed and dropped out during senior year since they wouldn't let him play football with his failing grades anymore. My dad, on the other hand, finished with some pretty decent grades and got a partial scholarship to a local community college. So to say Ted resented my dad was putting it mildly. And one day when my dad was going to his apartment, Ted and his gang ambushed him and beat him terribly in the back alley. My dad lay bloody and unconscious in that alley all night. He was found in the morning by an old lady walking her dog and she called for help. He was in the hospital for months with several broken bones and head trauma. And this caused him to lose out on all of his college classes and he had to retake them. Of course, he told the police it was Ted and his cronies that beat him up, but the police weren't good at their jobs. And they claimed that no evidence that Ted did it because he and his friends all supposedly had alibis and there were no other witnesses. Well, that didn't sit well with my dad. He spent some time in physical recovery after getting out of the hospital and then moved to a new apartment with a friend as a roommate. Together they plotted his revenge on Ted. My dad told me that back then, if the police failed you, then you took payback into your own hands. Now, a thing of note is that my grandfather on my dad's side worked at the city dump, and he was always bringing things home to collect, donate, fix, resell, etc. My dad helped him out with this a lot, so he learned a lot about fixing and making things. And while with his father at work, he found ways of sneaking into that dump at night. And as a teenager, he would sneak in there at night with his friends to find stuff they used to build a hidden fort in the woods nearby. My dad said that the fort was so well made that it even had a makeshift wood stove that they made out of recycled bricks and a metal barrel they used in the winter to keep the fort warm. This is important later. So over a few nights, my dad and his friends snuck into the dump just like they used to in order to look around for things that they could use. Bit by bit, they found some old stinky clothes, shoes, and some old wooden baseball bats. And a few other things useful for revenge. The dump also had an assortment of used tools the employees found in the trash and set aside to be used on site, but also regularly borrowed, so no one really kept track of them. My dad and his friends kept all of the stuff they were going to use hidden at the old fort they made as teenagers near the dump, just so they had a perfect place to build the tools of their revenge. Next, they made sure they had as solid as an alibi as they could make. My dad and his friends were living on the top floor in an old 3-story apartment building and was already well liked in the building for being handy and fixing a few things for his neighbors. The walls between apartments were kind of thin, so neighbors often heard the comings and goings of people on the same floor. They'd come out to greet my dad and his friend when they came home in the evening, and apparently the building had no fire escape, so the doors were typically the only way in or out. And the main door of the building was generally locked at night with the clerk sitting watch the entire time. They came home, checked in with the clerk, and said their good evenings to several neighbors and then locked themselves in their apartment. They waited till midnight and then used a knotted rope found at the dump to climb down 3 stories from their apartment window, which coincidentally was right above the dumpsters in the side alley. They hid part of the hanging rope between the gutter pipe and then hoofed it a few miles to the old fort, where they'd hidden what Dad referred to as revenge cycles. He told me they were bicycles that they had pieced together from junk parts found in the dump, that they were built and modified using the borrowed tools to have mounts for carrying the baseball bats, and a few other things they couldn't fit in their backpacks as they needed at the ready without making much noise of bogging them down. They rode the revenge cycles to the bungalow in an old neighborhood where Todd was living with his friends. Though squatting may be a better word, Dad said it was a drug house where dealing was regularly done. Which was, in a good way, because that meant they wouldn't call the police unless they wanted to risk exposing their operation. They scouted the area for a few nights to plan their attack and then waited for the perfect opportunity. First, my dad and his friend put on Halloween masks to cover up their faces and took a tire iron that they'd bought and quietly removed the lug nuts from 2 of the wheels that were on Ted's crappy van. Then they sprayed painted an insignia that was used by another gang from the area on the side of the van to make it look like it was a rival gang dispute. My dad and his friend then spied on Ted and his gang for hours from the windows using homemade periscopes that were painted dull black so they couldn't be seen. Ted and his cronies spent time getting drunk and high until Ted got so wasted he went to bed. My dad and his friend waited patiently for Ted to start snoring and quietly snuck into the house through the window of the room he was sleeping in. Locked the door from the inside and bolstered it with a chair, then in unison bashed both of Ted's legs multiple times right on the kneecaps with baseball bats. And when Ted tried to cover himself, they bashed his arms too. Then they held him down and emptied a plastic bag of fresh warm shit they just contributed to making all over his face before getting the hell out of there because he was screaming. Ted's cronies couldn't get into the room before my dad and his friend were out of there. They ducked into another yard and rode off in their revenge cycles from a different street before anyone saw them. But they heard from other people in the area that Ted's cronies tried to load him into his van and take him to the hospital. But as they were going, the wheels on the side of the van came off and they had to call an ambulance. Both of Ted's kneecaps were so badly broken that the doctor said he'd never fully recover and would have to walk with a cane for years. As for Ted's cronies, a few of them got arrested. Police came to the hospital to take a statement from Ted and noticed that a couple of them didn't look so good. They asked them a few questions, then searched them, and they ended up in the slammer for drug possession, which prompted police to search the bungalow where they were living in, but some of the other guys were smart enough to move all the drugs to another location when they thought a rival gang was after them, so the cops didn't find much. Ted's remaining Coonies later got cornered by my dad and his friend the next night when they followed them in their disguises on the revenge cycles to a back alley where they'd been known to regularly hang out and sell drugs. And this time they brought a gun to hold them hostage with. My dad's friend held the gun while my dad disarmed them, all with some knives they were carrying, and then beat them up with a bat. After the beatings were over, my dad and his friend claimed to be a rival gang and told Ted's Croonies that if they didn't leave town, they'd get something a lot worse than a simple beating. And for some of the added incentive, they then sprayed on one of their feet with lighter fluid and dropped a lit match onto them, causing the guy to freak out and kick his flaming shoes off. This seemed to work as all of them were gone from the city not long after that. My dad and his friend hid the revenge cycles and dropped the knotted rope from the window into the knotted rope from the window into the dumpster below, where they later retrieved it in the morning while taking the trash out and disposed of it. Police, of course, did eventually come to talk to my dad and his roommate, but they claimed they had no involvement in what happened to Ted, and the neighbors and the apartment clerk all told them that they never left the building after getting home on those days. My dad and his roommate then let the police come into their apartment to search the place, but they didn't find anything that could be considered evidence, as they had already disposed of the stuff they had used by taking apart their revenge cycles, and at night burned the baseball bats, masks, and the shoes and clothes they wore, and the knotted rope in the fort barrel stove since there was still nothing left but ash. As for the gun, well, my dad said it was never real, but was instead a very realistic metal toy gun revolver that looked real enough in the dark to hold up to someone, and then get rid of it by tossing it into the dump. The cops were satisfied in the belief my dad had nothing to do with the incident and just bid them a good day. Dad never told anyone else but me and his younger brother that he and his friends did all of that. As for Ted, Dad said he never really bothered anyone ever again. And he ended up eventually leaving town some years later because he was convinced another gang was still out to get him. What happened to him after that, Dad didn't know. I could tell he felt some measure of guilt for what he did back then, but also seemed to feel fairly justified in it. As well, since Ted had badly hurt many people around town, just like what he had done to my dad. So I suppose it was well-deserved on some level, but my dad adamantly told me to never try anything like what he did, and I can't say I blame him. TLDR, my father was beaten up within an inch of his life by a jealous gangbanger laying Ted. So he came back, broke Ted's legs, covered his face in fresh shit, and sabotaged his vehicle. Then scared off the rest of Ted's gang for good. Whew. That story is crazy. Your dad got mad, broke this nigga's legs, and then shitted on him, bro. What the hell? I mean, I've heard of taking a shit on your boss's desk because they pissed you off, but you beat this man so badly that he has to use a cane for the rest of his life. You know what? That reminds me of that scene from that one movie when, like, the old people, but like that old, like babysitting their grandkids, but it wasn't actually their grandkids or some shit. It was weird as hell, but I just remember the old man just, like, stuffing his diaper in the kid's face, bruh.
You have a problem with germs, don't you?
Anyway, I want to thank you guys so much for checking out the video. I hope that you liked it. I will be having the next part of After Party coming out pretty soon. I'm going to see about uploading it at least by Sunday, so you guys can go ahead and get back into it. I am getting another game pretty soon, and I'm going to start uploading more content as far as my gaming. I just wanted to upload a quick video of Reddit for you guys so that, you know, you guys can still get these stories and enjoy yourself, because we all like a good nuclear revenge. But anyway, thank you guys so much again for checking out this video, and I hope you guys have a great night. Like I said, leave a like on the video and also comment below. Let me know if you guys have any stories or whatever that you want to share. I could check them out and add them to my own videos as well. And hit that notification bell so you can be notified on all of my latest uploads. And I will also be leaving links to the Reddit stories at the bottom of the video in the description, so please check them out if you would like to give them a read, and check out the comments. With that, I hope you guys have a great night. I love you guys so much, and I'll catch you later. Peace!